by being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And by being a racing driver means you are racing with other people. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver. Because we are competing to win. And the main motivation to all of us is to compete for victory.
Welcome to the Late Night Race Review. Thanks for joining us for a special episode this week. I'm Dave Jericho, and with me as always is Owen Scott. Don't forget to give the podcast a follow or subscribe on your platform of choice. And with that said, let's get on with it. Scotty?
So yesterday, Dave, marked the 28th anniversary of the tragic passing of one of Formula One's greats, Ayrton Senna. With over 160 F1 races, 41 victories, 65 podiums, and of course the 3 drivers' titles. A career that spanned a decade, starting back with his first race in Brazil in 1984 until his tragic accident in 1994 at the San Marino Grand Prix. Before we look back on Senna's career, what is one of your earliest or perhaps favorite memories of Ayrton Senna?
Do you know, I have to say, I think for me, the earliest memory is, I don't know whether, I'll say my earliest memory, even though it's a faint memory, is probably my favorite memory. Because I suppose I started watching Formula One with my dad when I was a kid, and we used to watch it like on race days on Sundays. You'd watch it, and we were Nigel Mansell fans. So we were, well, my dad was a Nigel Mansell fan, and I just sort of followed suit. You know, whatever he was shouting at the TV, I was shouting alongside him. The race I remember or have the fondest memory of would be the Jerez, the Spanish Grand Prix in '86, and mainly because, again, my dad was cheering on Nigel Mansell. And that's why I say it's a faint memory of Ayrton Senna, but it's a fond memory of it because of my dad, you know, watching it and getting into Formula One with my dad. But that race, I mean, ended up being a classic and ended up being, I think, the second or third closest finish in Formula One history. And of course, you don't remember, or as a kid, I don't remember sort of what Ayrton Senna did. All I remember is, you know, me and my dad jumping around the sitting room cheering on Nigel Mansell to gain on Senna to win the race. So you're just like this 5-year-old kid amped up jumping around on the sofa, you know. So it's that's probably my fondest memory is the Spanish Grand Prix for a couple of reasons, I suppose.
For those who don't know, give us a brief rundown of what happened during the race that led it to be one of the closest finishes of all time. I believe 14 thousandths of a second between them over the line. Yeah,
it was fantastic. I think it went down as, like I was saying before, it went down as one of the closest finishes in F1 history. And proper on your feet cheering to the checkered flag. But not many people were there at the Grand Prix. I mean, it was the first time back in Jerez in 4 years. So the Spanish fans, you know, they had no driver that they were rooting for. The ticket prices were high. So there was very low sort of turnout. But I mean, there's no point in going lap by lap through it because, look, it wasn't that exciting of a race until sort of the very end, sort of the last 9-10 laps in. But you had the sort of the top 5. You had Senna, Piquet, Rosberg, Mansell, and Prost sort of all setting the pace out front. You had sort of Senna that was setting the pace, you know, sort of fuel saving, effectively similar to what we have now, fuel and tire saving. And then I think as the race went on, then you were getting to sort of about 10 laps during the middle of the race where Mansell then started to make a move and started overtaking the cars until he eventually, I think we got to about lap 30, lap 40 or something like that, lap 39, lap 40, when he finally caught and passed Senna, which was, I think we had Prost in the mix there as well. I can't quite remember that particular lap, but what you had then was Mansell, then his tires started going off and then Senna started catching him back. But then sort of Mansell then was managed to hold up Senna enough that Prost then came into mix. So you had sort of like a 3-way fight then. And Mansell's tires started going off and Mansell then started dropping back. And then we had an issue where Mansell then decided, all right, 9 laps left. I'm coming in for a set of tires. And obviously Senna and Prost staying out on the track. So Mansell comes in, you've got then does his pit stop. I can't quite remember. I don't think there was much of a speed limit in the pit lane at that stage, so they were pretty much herring into those pit lanes. So he came in for his pit stop, and I think he was about 19 seconds behind with 9 laps left, but managed to catch. Then he was catching Senna, I think 3 to 4 seconds a lap on Senna, and then literally coming up to the last hairpin, like the front wing of Mansell was up against the rear of Senna. And as they then exited the hairpin coming down the straight, Mansell pulled out to the left, and it was sort of like a drag race. And literally, I'd say with about 100 yards or so to go to the pit to the finish flag, Mansell just started creeping up, and his tires were you could just see his front tires leveling up with the rear tires and getting closer and closer. And then, of course, the two of them crossed the line then, and Senna took the win with, like you said, 14 thousandths of a second. It was it's a fantastic, and if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend doing a little bit of a dig into YouTube and having a look at the highlights of that race. It's fantastic. The ending was fantastic.
Yeah, proper photo finish.
Absolute proper photo finish. And when you see those two cars coming out of the corner, and the old cars, you can see the power that was in them, and how much they were wrestling with them. You can just feel the energy that was coming off that sort of racing. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
So what type of driver, for people who don't know Ayrton Senna or are coming into this fresh, what type of driver was he, and how would you define his driving style?
Do you know, he was an aggressive driver. As much as you can be an aggressive driver, but he adapted very well. So he was able to keep that aggressive style through different sort of generations, different regulation changes, and different teams. So different type of cars, having to keep that aggressive driving style across all these different changes. So the ability to do that was fantastic. Very much like, I mean, you know, was never going to give an inch, was never going to give up a corner. Just absolutely fantastic. And he had, like, one of the things I think, and again, I'm going to sort of paraphrase on this, but one of the things he sort of pioneered was during the turbo era, because the anti-lag or the lag on the turbo, he used to feather the throttle through the corner so that when he exited the corner, the turbo was already spooled up. So he was getting a better drive out of and the turbo kicking in quicker coming out of a corner than other drivers were getting. So he was able to draw so much from the cars. It was absolutely fantastic. Like,
just such great intelligence as well. I know you say about his intensity. I heard a good quote by Jordan Peterson saying, "It's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener at war." So learning to kind of channel your rage and learn how to use it and control it, rather than
absolutely.
just going off the handle and not being able to control yourself.
And that's it. He was but that's a good thing. Like he was an aggressive driver, but it was controlled well until we saw him with Prost maybe later on in his career. But it was relatively controlled aggression. It was aggression with the way he drove the car as well. You know, the feathering the throttle through the corners. You know when you see those old 80s shots of cars sort of sliding, you know they're sort of almost drifting around corners and stuff like that. You know, he was just just really aggressive, late breaking into corners. It was absolutely fantastic. And even the defensive side of his game as well. He was, elbows out again, wouldn't give an inch, and wouldn't give up a corner if it meant the two of them going off the track, which it often had done in the past. That's the sacrifice he was willing to make if it meant winning the race. If I'm not winning the race, nobody's winning the race.
And I think I already know the answer to this question, but what drivers would you think are similar to Ayrton Senna today?
It has to be Max Verstappen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be, with the aggression. Even again, and just literally the last thing I said there about not giving up a corner, that's very much Max Verstappen. You know, he would happily take the two of them out. Okay, maybe he's starting to evolve a little bit now. Maybe that was in his early days. But even the wet conditions, like Max Verstappen's excellent in wet conditions, and Senna as well. He was fantastic in wet conditions. I mean, we only have to look at his rookie year in Monaco to see how well he did in those wet conditions.
Yeah. Mentioning Monaco, this, as you said, it was his rookie year. It didn't take him long to kind of announce himself on arrival in F1, did it?
No, I mean that race, that was only the 5th race of his rookie season, and he was down in 13th on the grid for on a sopping, like an absolute downpour of a like so heavy that if it was today, the race wouldn't even start. You know, those, like we wouldn't even be racing in modern day Formula One. That's how heavy the rain was coming down. Actually, I saw a funny thing as well, actually, on that race in Monaco, that the rain was actually so heavy that James Hunt and Murray Walker were doing the commentary on BBC, and their TV feed cut out because of the rain. Like, it was coming down so heavy, their TV feed to the commentary box cut out. So they could only give the race positions by looking out the window of the commentary box and wait for cars to come by. Then they could tell people on the TV, you know, sort of where everybody is in the race.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, he started 13th in that race, and within, I think, 15 laps, he was up to 4th. And even with the conditions worsening or fluctuating, he was still setting fastest laps, which, like I said, is great if he was a seasoned driver. But as a rookie, first time around Monaco in an F1 car in wet conditions, absolutely incredible. Like, but he started catching. Then Prost was in first. He started catching up with Prost, so he was in second, catching up with Prost, and then Prost apparently for it must have been the guts of 3 or 4 laps, I believe, was trying to call for a red flag of the race, and then eventually the red flag did come out, and I think Prost then stopped the car on the start-finish straight, but Senna sort of beamed on past him, went round for another lap, like, and thought, I've won it, like, let's go around and celebrate. Only obviously to come back and find out that the actual official count was going to be from the lap before. Yeah. So he came in second on that race, but still second, rookie season, wet Monaco, to come second to Alan Prost. That was just incredible, and again, sort of highlight your ability in the wet is absolutely fantastic.
And in somewhat of an inferior car as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would have been, especially to the McLaren anyway. But I mean, look, he didn't have to. Well, he had to wait a little bit. I mean, I think it was the following season in Portugal then when he got his first his maiden win. But absolutely fantastic drive. But that race, though, just a little bit of a tidbit of information on that, and take it as you will, like whoever's, you know, the conspiracy theories, everyone get their tinfoil hats out. But there was actually controversy about that. Jackie Ickx, I think Ickx is the way you pronounce his name. Sorry if I'm wrong on that one, so someone write in and correct me. He was the race director, and he drove for Porsche in the World Endurance Championship. And Prost's McLaren had turbo engineered by Porsche in the back of their car. And the conspiracy is that they could see, because they weren't stopping the race, and they could see then that Senna was probably going to take Prost for the win. And the conspiracy is that Ickx then called the red flag because he was a Porsche driver and wanted the company that employ him to win the race, basically. Which, look, take it with a pinch of salt, but I'm just delivering the conspiracies.
That's what we do best.
That's what we do best.
But he has a career full of amazing highlights. But what about his comeback drive in Suzuka in 1988 season, and of course his first driver's title with that?
Like, this was the start of something interesting. Like, this was his first season with McLaren. Sort of Alan Prost, and again, I don't know whether I haven't seen any confirmation about this, but I believe Alan Prost was very instrumental in getting Senna or getting the team to bring Senna to McLaren. Which is obviously, if that is true, then that is a move that maybe he doesn't look back at it with regret, because I mean, it's given Formula One two of the greatest seasons. But I mean, I am assuming he did do that with the expectation that, you know, Prost was going to be number one, Senna was going to be number two. Like, but it did give us 2 seasons of the greatest rivalry, especially team rivalry, that I think we've had in Formula One ever. Like, it was absolutely fantastic. But and then going into that race, which makes this even more special. So you had that was sort of the lead up. That was the start of the season. Obviously, he signs in McLaren. Then we go to Suzuka, which is the last race, or second last race of the season. Yeah, Australia was the last race. Second last race of the season. If Senna wins in Suzuka, he wins the driver's title. But ends up, I think he stalls the car off the line. He's in pole position. As far as I remember, he had pole position in that race. Stalls it on the line and drops back to 14th. And manages then a comeback drive from 14th to take the win. And I think not only did he take the win, but I think, and again, I'm going to be going literally off the top of my head here, but I think he took the win by like 9 seconds or 10 seconds from Prost. And when you consider this wasn't varying conditions, like this was a dry race. He came from 14th to win on a dry track. I mean, and in a race where, like, I mean, look, what we're talking about, 88, like, he's only a few years. He's what? He's 4 years an F1 driver. Not enough to be fully experienced, like, you know. And he managed to have that calm to be able to make a drive like that, knowing that the World Championship is on the line, and still managed to get it over the line and win the World Championship. I mean, that for me is just, I mean, that speaks highly of the man himself, like, as well, like his determination and his commitment and his ability for that clear thinking of what needed to be done. I mean, look, we only have to look back at some of his quotes and stuff like that of what he says. He's very much, he knew what needed to be done. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Also, another great highlight was his first home victory in '91 at Interlagos in Brazil. He managed to finish the race stuck in 6th gear to take the victory, and on the podium, he was so physically exerted and his shoulders were so sore that he could barely lift the trophy above his head.
That's right. That was that race, was it?
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember seeing that. And you could see his arms shaking as he was trying to hold the trophy above his head. That's right.
Unbelievable. He actually physically, he passed out in the car at the end of the race from the exertion of trying to keep it going around the track in 6th.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, isn't it? It's absolutely unbelievable.
Just unreal. So unfortunately, his career came to a shocking end in '94 at the San Marino GP when his car went off the track at the Tamburello on lap 7. The telemetry data recovered from the car showed that he entered the corner at 309 kilometers an hour. And then braked and then downshifted twice in an effort to kind of slow the car down, and ultimately collided with the unprotected concrete barrier at 211 kilometers an hour.
That is a serious collision.
Yeah. What can you tell us about that weekend at the San Marino GP and the lead up to the accident at the Tamburello?
Do you know, in Formula One, like, there's been dark weekends. I mean, it was common even before this, sort of especially 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You know, drivers dying during races. Usually every season, a driver or two would die. And so, but this weekend was particularly a bad weekend. I mean, you had 2 fatalities, 1 near fatality, and another sort of major collision. So, excuse me. So yeah, on the Friday, I mean, we had the first incident was on the Friday, which we had Rubens Barrichello clipping the curb, taking flight, hitting the, I mean, we were talking about this just before the podcast, but taking flight and sort of misses or just barely clips the top of the tire barrier, clips the wall that's the sporting wall that's behind it, and the sport netting, and then sort of the nose of the car then clips the top of the tire barrier, and then sort of flips him back out onto the circuit or onto the side of the circuit. I mean, he was doing there at about 220 kilometers an hour. And if, for anyone who hasn't seen the footage, obviously you don't need to watch it if you don't want to watch something like that. But to say he took flight is exactly what happened. He hit the curb, and the car, the trajectory of the car was only going up. So it was absolutely crazy. And he got lucky as well, because I mean, he had swallowed his tongue, and only for Sid Watkins, who would have been at the time, he was the F1 on track medical team, or the head of the on track medical team. He arrived and was able to sort of clear his airway, you know, sort of take the tongue out from the throat, and where they were able to then sort of stabilize him on the grid, or on the track, and get him to the medical center. So it was great. I mean, it's strange as well, and I mean, there's a lot of stories going around about what happened next and sort of what went on. But Senna did sort of visit Rubens in the medical center, which you know, which is, you can imagine, his fellow countryman. You would imagine that was he was going to do that, and I think, you know, sort of he was there when Rubens regained consciousness, and I think as well, Rubens wanted to get back in his car. I think it was one of the I want to say, I can't think of the guy's name. I think it was, oh God, I'm thinking Gary Adams, but I think I might have that wrong. But he went to see Rubens, and he basically told him to get the backup car ready. He wanted to jump in the backup car, but I mean, that was just going on pure adrenaline. You know, he had just kind of regained consciousness. He was on pure adrenaline, and of course, then, you know, he was saying, then obviously when they left him alone for a while and his body sort of calmed down, then he realized how sort of battered and bruised he was, and I think the thought of getting in the backup car suddenly went out of his mind fairly sharpish. But I mean, I mean, that's sort of, it only got worse from there. The weekend, unfortunately. I mean, we had then the final qualifying then on Saturday, where we had another major incident where we had Sir Roland Ratzenberger, and he was coming into I think it was the Villeneuve curve. I think it is the Villeneuve curve. And his front wings broke off, went underneath the car, and he was doing 314 kilometers an hour, and went under the car, had obviously no steering. You're on a sled at that point. You know, you're on a skid. Went straight into the concrete barrier, and was killed instantly. And I actually have, let me just bring it up here now. I actually have a little excerpt I want to read. I actually have two excerpts. I have one excerpt here I want to read. Just had some quotes from Sid Watkins, and he also gives a little bit of insight into Senna's mentality over that race weekend, and him as a driver as well. So bear with me, I'll try and read this out as best as I can. So Senna commandeered a course car to go to the scene, only to be told by the late F1 medical officer and world-renowned neurosurgeon Dr. Sid Watkins there was no hope for the Austrian. Senna broke down in tears, and Watkins, who was a close friend, told him he should retire immediately and go fishing with him in his Scottish estate. Senna replied, "I cannot stop, Sid, I cannot." Watkins would later write that he had a premonition at Imola would be a bad weekend. And then the direct quote from Sid was, excuse me, "I'd been pretty upset after Ratzenberger was killed, but by the Sunday morning I had settled down. I can't say I was looking forward to the race, but I was certainly looking forward to the end of the weekend." Senna was fastest in the Sunday morning warm-up, but by nearly a second. So his speed was certainly had not been dented by the incidents of the previous 2 days. In the driver's briefing before the race, however, a minute's silence was held in memory of Ratzenberger. Watkins, who was at the meeting, reported later he did not think it was a good idea. "When I looked around the room," Sid Watkins' direct quote here, "when I looked around the room, most of the drivers were taking it well, except for Ayrton, who, for the second time in 24 hours, was crying. He was doing his best to overcome his grief, but silent tears were running down his face, and he was licking them away to conceal his distress," he later wrote. So that's that's the morning briefing before he went out on that track. Wow. And that sort of says a little bit about the mentality of him on the day from the emotional side of things, but also his mentality of the type of driver he was, that he had that commitment, that dedication that he wanted to continue on. So even with that in mind, he started from pole position on Sunday, And then, I mean, straight away, then we had another major incident happened. We had Pedro Lamy, I think, went into the back of JJ Leto's bogged down Benetton. And literally, I don't know whether anyone has seen at the start of this race, but debris just, you know, literally was all over the start finish straight. And this is sort of part leads into some sort of theories as to what happened with Senna's crash later on. And these are, unless people kind of dive into what happened at the San Marino Grand Prix, a lot of people kind of forget actually. I mean, Ratzenberger's crash was a very forgotten crash. Barrichello's was even forgotten. So the fact that Pedro Lamy went into the back of JJ Leto, which brought out the safety car, which again led to explanations from teams as to what may have caused the crash for Senna. All this, a lot of people don't actually remember that. They just remember the corner and what the actual crash that happened there. So what happened then anyway, so the safety car came out. We saw the safety car then for 5-6 laps out. And then safety car peeled off, ready for the start of lap 6. And we had Senna then followed by Schumacher, who sort of just literally took off guns blazing. And then they did a lap. They got then, however far into the, obviously, however far, as far as Tamburello onto the lap 7. And then the red flag came out. And then again, I have some quotes here from Sid Watkins as well. For the third time that weekend, there was a frantic effort to cut the chin strap and get the helmet off. We supported Ayrton's neck and removed the helmet. His eyes were closed and he was deeply unconscious. He looked serene. I raised his eyelids and it was clear from his pupils he had had a massive brain injury. We lifted him from the cockpit and laid him on the ground. As we did, he sighed. Though I am totally agnostic, I felt his soul departed at that moment. I mean, so Jeez. We don't need to go into the details of the crash. That's obviously from Sid, who attended the scene. And then it was at 6:40 then that evening that Senna then was publicly pronounced dead.
Heavy stuff. So what caused Senna's crash in the end?
So there was an okay, before we get into the investigation that was done, excuse me, Williams had put out sort of some information. I'm pretty sure it was directly by Williams. Again, if I'm incorrect, someone can, contact us and correct me. But initially the blame, and this is why I said about Pedro Lamy going into the back of JJ Leto's car and the safety car being brought out, because the original what came out from Williams was basically that the cars following the safety car, they basically, the tire pressure had dropped due to the tires cooling, which lowered the ride height of the car. And in turn, they reckon that coming into the Tamburello corner, there is bumps on that corner, and as a result, the car sitting lower was hitting those bumps like a skid a lot harder than it would normally. This well, it is wrong, obviously, for a number of reasons. One, obviously, we can, and again, I don't want to get into details on the crash, but there was no turning on the wheels of the car, which indicate, like, if he was losing control of the car from it bottoming out, the wheels, the tires weren't changing direction as he was going off track. Also, he'd already done a full lap prior to the accident, which would have heated the tires up, and he would have been in more optimal conditions going into lap 7, where we can see from the footage the car bottomed out equally as hard on lap 6 as it did on lap 7. In fact, I would argue that it probably bottomed out more in lap 6 than it did on lap 7.
Right.
But there was an investigation anyway, from an independent investigation in Bologna, and the investigation was into Senna and Ratzenberger's crash. But I mean, Ratzenberger's crash was a little bit more cut and dry. But the cause of Senna's crash, though, in the official report, was put down to the steering column. So basically, Senna had asked for an adjustment pre-race to the steering column, because he wasn't happy with the positioning of the wheel. So they shortened the steering column. So effectively, as crude as it sounds, it was a cut and weld job on the steering column. And what happened then through the course of the race, or the few laps, those welds or whatever had been put in place had come undone, had broken, and as a result he had no steering coming into that left turn, which obviously saw him go straight on then into the wall. So that's the official investigation report. That is their findings. And I'll be honest, I would believe and take that as because that was originally a conspiracy theory for a while, that people thought that, you know, it was the steering column and Williams were involved in a cover-up, that they didn't want to say that they had made a mistake. But the official finding was that it was the steering column, and I would be more willing to sort of put my money on that was the case, more than the car bottoming out from low ride height because of the tire pressures.
Yeah. So this was a seminal moment in terms of safety in F1 history, the 94 season. So what has changed in the years since then?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Well, a lot changed. I saw a great quote from Gerhard Berger, because in the 70s, like I was saying earlier, sort of the decades that sort of preceded the crash of Senna, it was common that a driver died every season. That was inevitable. It was nearly a given that it was going to happen, and in some cases, more than one would die in a season, especially in the 70s and 60s and stuff. But in the 80s, though, there was fewer fatalities. There was 2 fatalities, race fatalities in the 80s. 4 overall. 2 of them came from testing. 2 of them came from races themselves. But Gerhard Berger, there's a good quote from Gerhard Berger that said, he says, "We got too confident that the dangerous times were over. We realized that it had not changed at all and that we had gotten lucky for a while. That shook the FIA, the teams, the drivers. After this, everybody joined forces together with the FIA in the lead, and it came to a very good result." So, you know, it's the 80s sort of painted an incorrect picture. You know, they had 8 years without a fatality between, I think it was 86 and 94, obviously with Senna. Excuse me. So what we had then, what followed, we had some immediate sort of reaction straight after. So the days that followed, you had the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association, was reformed, sort of spearheaded by Schumacher, Berger, and Lauda. And they called straight away, immediately called then for sort of reduced speed in pit lanes. Also, there was a strange one that I didn't know about, actually, that I found was actually a draw for the pit stop order. And I'm not sure how long that actually lasted. Did that actually stay for the whole season? But there was almost like a sort of like a lottery as to what your position would be when you were able to come in for your pit stop during the race. Yeah. So you were sort of allocated a pit stop window that you would come in for. So yeah, I thought that was strange. I didn't actually know that. But then, as the season even went on, like in Spain, then, which was not too much longer, like they reduced the diffusers. Actually, I won't even list off all the stuff. Basically, they started reducing stuff to reduce the downforce by about 15%, and then they also started doing changes to reduce the power output of the cars, basically to try and slow them down overall, is what they were trying to do. I'm going to also say, actually, one thing I meant to mention, that accident from Senna came only a month. Obviously, he was driving for Williams when that accident happened. Yeah. And that came only a month after Frank Williams' accident, which put him in the wheelchair. Right. Which, I didn't realize that was actually as close together as that. So just a bit of info there. So immediately after, anyway, you had the GPDA was formed. You had some changes to try and slow down the cars, and then you had Sid Watkins, who was then promoted as the FIA expert advisory, on the FIA expert advisory safety committee. He was the chairman of that, who was very instrumental in sort of the safety that was implemented in Formula One. Right up until sort of his retirement and death. So, I mean, we had like, increasing in crash testing, better, sort of more stricter guidelines, more protection around the driver's head. We had the tethers as well for the wheels, stop the wheels flying off. Because I do remember, and I can't quite recall what race it happened, but I'm pretty sure we had a marshal on track that was hit with a flying wheel, which then sparked the conversation about the tethers.
Yeah.
So, and then sort of more recently, then you had the hands, the head and neck support, so which is sort of the harness they have on their shoulders, which clips onto their helmets, and that's to help support the neck and obviously the spine and stuff from whiplash and in severe impacts. And then, of course, then in recent years now we have the halo, and in 2022, obviously with the additional weight to the cars is predominantly because of improvement in the impact structures and stuff of the car. And I mean, we didn't have a death in Formula One then for 20 years since Senna. Like it was Jules Bianchi then who died then in 2014. Well, he actually died in 2015. But he had the accident in 2014 in Suzuka in Japan, when he went into the back of the digger or the forklift that was lifting up the car to take it off, and which then instantly sparked the virtual safety car. We got the virtual safety car came in straight after that, because cars were just sort of going around. There was a safety car out, but they were sort of going around trying to catch up to the back at any speed they really wanted to. Yeah. And then of course the halo, had the halo been in place, you could have seen maybe a better outcome for Jules Bianchi on that.
Yeah. I mean, you only have to look at Jeddah this year and Mick Schumacher's crash, the onboard footage, to see how far these cars really have come since then, since 1994. It's absolutely amazing what they've done.
Well, look, even back to Roman Grosjean's crash in Bahrain, where he went into the barrier I saw that, and I mean, that is as bad as any crash going back to the 70s and 80s. And, you think of Niki Lauda, who was caught in his car. I mean, Roman Grosjean's accident was every bit as horrific as that. And watching it on TV, you see it and you're like, well, hands up, that's it. There's no way anyone's walking out of that. I mean, like a small portion of the cockpit, literally only the cockpit, was buried between the two, the gap in the Armco barrier. So that in itself, okay, he suffered some burns, but to be able to get out of that shows the improvement of Formula One safety. And it has gone from a sport that was originally seen as, like I said, seeing a death every season was expected, to what we have now, which is probably one of the most safety conscious motorsports in the world, to the detriment of the weight of the cars, the speed, the performance of the cars. If basically safety takes precedence, which is great to see. And that's all sort of, stems from, going back to Senna, Jules Bianchi, learning their lessons. It's great to see. So it's safe to say that Ayrton Senna was one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. From what he achieved in Formula One, his personality, and the lasting impact he has had following his death, he has left a mark that is woven into the fabric of F1 forever.
I would have to go back to 78 and 79 and 1980, when I was go-kart driving as a teammate for Fullerton, named Fullerton. He was very experienced, and I enjoyed very much that driving with him, because he was fast, he was consistent. He was, for me, a very complete driver. And it was pure driving, pure racing. There wasn't any politics then, right? And no money involved either. So it was real racing. And I have that as a very good memory.